So the first thing I'd like to do is just demonstrate how simple it can be exporting your geometry from Revit into the virtual environment. Now, I won't go into any detail of applying any settings or any occupancy information, which you can do with Revit MEP. I'll just simply set the geometry and then export. So with this model that we have in front of us, it's a medium-sized building, you can see there. So if I just go back to level 1, I've already applied spaces as with Revit MEP to the upper floors. So to even show you how easy it is with Revit MEP to do this, we'll just go to the Analysis tab and I'll click on Spaces. And here I'll just change the offset to 0 and the upper limit to 2. And I'm just going to click this button here, place spaces automatically. You can see it's done that. Close that off. So we'll just save the model. Must do that before you go to export. And I'm just going to click on the add-ins tab to show you the virtual environment plugin. So that would be, this is now us just exporting the geometry. So click on the import model button. So this will now extract the GBXML out of Revit in this case. And once it's complete, we'll get a report which will pop up. Now this report basically gives you a health check on the GBXML that has been extracted from whatever package that you're using. In this case we're using Revit MEP. So I'll go into more detail about this later on and what it all means. So if I just close that off now. So at this stage we're just ready to export to the virtual environment. So you just choose which version you want to go to. In this case I'm going to use the full VE Pro. So just click on that and we'll see your model in the virtual environment now. So we'll just open up the model viewer within the VE and you can see the model there. So we can then, I'll just turn on some shadows and animate that. So you can see the model's nice and clean and tidy. As I've mentioned, it is a medium-sized model. So when a model's been prepared with export in mind, the process can be a lot simpler. We opened up our Revit model, applied some spaces and exported it. So the process, as you can see, was fairly quick. So if we now go back and look in a bit more detail at the steps that I carried out to get to that stage.
So you can see the two graphs here that probably a lot of you have seen a lot of in these BIM webinars. I've seen them myself. The main key point to look at is obviously the blue line here. One is the ability to impact the cost of design and performance as you go through a project, which is offset by the cost of the design, this line, red line here, red line 2. And obviously, as you go through the project, anything that you try and update or change in a design costs a lot more. So the aim of BIM is to move this design hump, for better words, to move it back in the process to make things cheaper and more effective, basically having a more effective design for the client at the end result. You've also got this bottom graph here, which is showing the BIM maturity and the aim of governments by 2016 to have up to level 2. So there are the various levels of which users are wanting to aim to achieve, or the government set targets to achieve this. And from what I've experienced, there's been quite a lot of issue in getting to certain levels. Even level 2 has been a challenge, let's say. So that's the kind of what we're looking to achieve, and how we do it. At the moment we use GBXML, and you will have, Neil said, that IFC is the other format, as I call it, the kind of USB solution, plug solution that's the one system for all to translate between all softwares, which again from our point of view is the ultimate, where you can easily translate information between Now, in my experience at the moment, GBXML is quite a distance ahead. Now, we do have people on the boards of both formats, so we're always up to date with the latest developments from both. But as I say, if you're using any, you're going to get most success at the moment out of GBXML. And you can see there the top diagram there, how the GBXML looks at information within a model and how it breaks it down and reads that information. So that just gives you a basic understanding of what the model's doing, or the models, what they're trying to do between each other. Because of obviously experience, we've come up with these golden rules to looking at the geometry, and when you're creating the model, particularly within Revit, when you're looking to translate this information across to the virtual environment, and to be honest, it could be translate to any other energy package. These are the key things that you have to watch out for. I say watch out for, more to check to make things a much leaner process. The key one is to keep your geometry nice and simple, and try and obviously following the BIM process, trying to get your design early stage out and export to an energy package to get the key data from your energy model to see which way your design is going to go is a big one to try and a big step to try and achieve. Obviously, the further down the line you go, as we discussed with that graph, the harder it is to impact any big major design changes. So getting your overall concept and orientation and all these sort of things that can heavily affect your actual running costs of your building once it's actually an operational stage. These things can be set fairly early on. So the energy model, in an ideal world and hopefully a less costly world, would not be actually updated too greatly. There may be things that, key things like maybe glazing design will maybe change, maybe the U values or something like that. But these are easy things that that you can update within the virtual environment with some tools that we have within there. So you're not actually making major changes once you get into the finer detail stage of the design process. And that's the key element of BIM anyway. So if you're following those kind of the BIM good practice, you should achieve that. The other things that you can do, depending on the model size, these are you can detach from central if you're working across the network. This can speed up the export processes, some of you may find. You can also, if you have got a really large model, you can purge out any information that's not required just for the purpose of export. The use of appropriate family types and custom components relates to just if you do have, I say, a door element, this is probably a key one, you can look at these and you have to address whether, if you have a door element within Revit, then when you translate it to the virtual environment, it will see that as a door tag and it will come through opaque. So maybe if you've got glazed doors or something, you need to just be aware that that may happen. The next one is use the complexity that's relevant for the stage of design and what analysis that you're actually looking at for it. So again, maybe you're looking at certain lighting design or a glazing arrangements, you might want a detailed design complexity exported from Revit, or maybe it's early stage, you just want to get a rough idea of shapes and the amount of percentage glazing on a surface, a south-facing facade. Then you would maybe choose a lower complexity. And once you get into the virtual environment, you can run some checks to check your model. We'll look into each of these a bit more detail as we go through. So the workflow at the moment is basically that we would follow. You'd have your design model within Revit. You can translate that. Now there's a number of dialogues that you can, there's two dialogues that you can use to do this. So you can either, depending on whether you're using Revit Architecture or Revit MEP, will really determine which method that you use at the translation stage here. And then once you translate your geometry into the virtual environment, you can have some basic setup and run some basic analysis, and then you can further develop your idea or your concept using other modules within the virtual environment to the point you can fully detail your HVAC networks, etc. So what we'll do, if we just go back just now before we go into actual things that you've got to set up, which you can see the first screen here, we'll just go back and look at these in the model. So within, whether this is MEP or architecture, the main key difference between the two is architecture generally will deal with rooms and MEP will deal with spaces. From the actual exporting of information, what we can do, I can just show you if I just select. Well, first of all, actually, I'll go and actually show you the what you need to set. So in the sorry, I forgot to. In whether it's as I say MEP or architecture, you have to set area and volume computations for both. So you come in here and you'll set to areas and volumes. Now, there is the other option of how you define that. Generally, I'll just for all these exports, I would just set at wall finish, the default option for that. The key thing is area and volumes. Now, the way that you actually set up the model as well is key. The things that you have to obviously consider is if you're doing exporting the model very early stage, you're probably not going to be including any ceiling plans at that stage, so you could set the model up as I have here. So if I just go to this section here, and you'll see that the levels here are set, and I've set all my, in this case it's the rooms, but the spaces there as well. I've used the levels to tie these room volumes to. As you can see here up in the left-hand column, the properties dialog here. So I've not got any offsets in there. It's just tied to the levels to make things nice and clean and simple. If you did want to add in some more detail of ceiling voids, you can do that. The key thing is to make sure that if you do that, let's say if I drag that down, if you do actually apply that in there, then you're best to create an actual ceiling level option within your model, and again tie the spaces to these levels. That rather than just placing the spaces and trying to export these using the offset options. The other key thing to notice here is that because we're tying these to levels, and I'll just change that back up. You'll see that there's no gaps. So the main thing that you're trying to achieve is have a fully enclosed building envelope with no air gaps in there at all. You need to have a room or a space fully placed everywhere. That includes risers, lift shafts, stairs, anything like that. We need to have that. So if I just go back to my level 1, and I mentioned plenums there, so you can see here the plenum, we've got even a space placed in here. Now, while I've selected that, if you're using MEP, you've got the added option of actually putting some information or data applied to the spaces that you translate, which you can read once you're in the virtual environment. So for this plenum space, in your room properties, you can actually tell it that it is a plenum. So it's not going to be an occupiable space. So I'm just going to apply that. What you can also do is I just select these spaces here. You can add in a bit more information for these. So these are occupiable spaces. So I'm just going to change the space building type. And let's say actually these areas are, I'll go to lobby areas. I'll just pretend it's a hotel. and you can actually, if I go back in there, you can change the any of the lighting schedules or the power schedules as well. So you can set up some basic template information in here and choose what you want. So maybe, let's say, power schedule. We'll just change that to 6 AM till 10 PM. So you can change some of that information there. You can also, if you want, you can maybe change the occupancy. So I'll just change that to specified, and let's say something ridiculous, 50 people. And here we'll change the heat gain per person. I'll just put it up to a maximum. And okay that. So you can change some information there. The one thing that once you've done that and set that information, you just need to make sure you save. So at this point you'd say to yourself and go through a checklist. So you'd look, have I set my placed a room or space in every actual part of the model, and we've got a fully enclosed building envelope. Have I set my areas and volumes to areas and volumes computation and not just areas. You will get a warning if you don't do that. And then if you're happy with it, you make sure you save that. Now, actually, one other thing that you can do, question that comes up often, you can change, say, I'll just change the ones here. So select this space. If you want to change any of the names for these, you can type these in here in the identity. Make sure that's taken. Yeah. So you can put in names for whether it's rooms or spaces. Now within the actual Revit itself, up until 2013 I think it is, you had to define whether it was, if you were using architecture, you had to use rooms and vice versa if it was MEP spaces. But now you can, there is the option within Revit to change on the export what you choose, which you can do. Let me just save that before I move any further. In the MEP export options and GBXML, when you go into this dialog, you can see there's an option to change rooms or spaces, which I'll look at in a second. So again, got our model ready, we can just go back to our add-ins tab to the virtual environment plugin for Revit and click on the import option. And again, this is at this point we're just going to extract the GBXML out of Revit. So you just wait till you see the button comes alive again. So I mentioned about this this report. Again, I'll discuss that as a bit further on once we're going through. So once you get to this stage, you can choose whichever virtual environment option you're going to go to. So whether it's our freeware or our V toolkits or the full virtual V Pro. And we'll go across and have a look at this model. So if I just go into Apache now, and if I just select the model and click on we've got our new visualization tool that you can see basically what information is set up visually rather than just a list of data once you go into Apache. So just let's have a look at, say, the thermal template, and we can just apply that. So we can quickly see here what templates are applied to what spaces. So we can see we've got our key up in, if I just maximize this, top left hand corner we've got our key that tells us our building area, default, our lobby, template, office enclosed, and plenum. These office spaces I must have applied in another demonstration. So you can then say, let's look at our internal gains. So let's see our occupancy. and I changed my occupancy to actual people, which I set. Let's just apply that and have a look at that in the model. So again, we've got our key up in the top left-hand corner, giving us a graphical representation of what's going on. We can see our plenum's got 0 occupancy there. So you can quickly, with the Apache viewer, see what information you've set coming out, that you've brought across from Revit, which we didn't have before. So it was you had to basically go through the other option, which was to just look at the information from the data point of view. So to do that, what we'll do is just single out the ground floor, and we'll use one of our, not so new now, but our tabular room data information. So in here, let me just look, yeah, that's better. So we can, in here, you can go in and say, look at general information. Again, you can see here our templates that we set up for the these rooms here. And the particular one I renamed to lobby. You can see the information there. You can also go to your internal gains information, and you can see that I changed some of the information there as well. And where's our plenum? So if we go along, you can see the data that I've changed. It's actually changed color off template, so we can see any information that's not on template there. And I can see that that's our plenum space there. The gains are switched off. So you can, again, it's fairly easy even in the data view there to see what information's been set up and what remains on template information. And that is just basically information that's extra if you're using MEP, and you can apply to any space that comes across. And you've got the 2 ways of looking at it and viewing it. So looking back at, again, what you need to set up to export your model. So you need to, as I say, set your areas and volumes, and check that you've got your levels set, and tie your rooms or spaces to the levels. You need to make sure you set up your complexity, which I'll go to the actual dialogue and show you that in a second. And you can see there are a couple of images. The one on the left-hand side shows you a simple option export, and the one on the right-hand side shows a complex export option. As I mentioned earlier, you'd probably use the simple option if you're just very early stage, looking at spaces and orientation and just wanting to add in a conceptual glazing option. The complex with the mullions and shadings is where you're looking at actual light falling into the space and different glazing arrangements and mullion arrangements, maybe for curtain walls, walling systems, etc. So you can have a look at that. You'd probably export complex and mullions for that option. Now there's some basic kind of modelling options that you can be aware of when you're creating your actual Revit geometry that can help you out a lot in actual export. The main one is columns, and I'll talk a bit more about that when I come further down. But you can see the difference there between the image on the left and the one on the right, how columns can actually impact on your GBXML export. So it's a key thing to look at. Now in the past, sorry, I'll come back to that actually later on when I talk about some of the work that we've tried to carry out to help you guys as end users. The other thing to bear in mind are different wall conditions that can cause issues. I won't go into detail on all of these. You can find these in our white paper, which you'll get available on our website. We are in the process of updating it to the latest Revit releases, but most of the information is basically the same. It's just how you handle that within Revit. But the main key point to look at when you're looking at these room conditions is to have, so I'll go back to that, is to have one primary element that is a room bounding object. So whether that be for your walls that create a room, or the floor and the ceiling. So you just have one primary element creating the room bounding. If you've got anything else like sill levels or multiple room bounding layers to a wall, you need to uncheck these within Revit so that you've only... What will happen is you'll probably have shading devices or surfaces coming through within your space. So, and it's a simple thing that you can do as you're going along building up your Revit model. As I say, early stage design, these kind of things don't really creep in because you'll just be using a basic conceptual Revit wall, and it won't have any multiple layers, etc. You wouldn't have the design of a sill in your model, so it shouldn't be an issue early stage. The bottom image here is where you've got a wall that's protruding partly into a room. And again, this is just, you can see the top diagram here just displaying, making that wall non-room bounding. It doesn't affect your actual energy results because when you're looking at that space as from an energy point of view, it's all just one space. You can, if you wanted to have results for this area, just use room separation lines to split that off, which I can show you in the model. So again, these are much the same things. This is just looking vertically as you go up through your building. Having multiple elements that are room bounding can cause issues. And these are generally what you would see, maybe the placed space or room sandwiched between constructions. So it's easily, again, you'll find if you select one of and just get to your primary room bounding element, and then it will just free it up and you'll see it in front of you happening. The condition 2 there at the bottom is one to mention is just where you maybe got an access ramp in a multi-storey building. Maybe it's 10 stories, 7 floors as an access ramp. Again, we would just untick the room bounding element of the access ramp. Now I mentioned about ceilings, a small part about ceiling plenums and voids. As you look in plan view, you need to create, as I say, a space or a room into that void. But as you're going up through the building for a ceiling plenum, there's a number of ways that you can look at it depending on the complexity of the design. As I say, early stage, you're probably not going to have too much of an issue looking at that, but maybe if you're further on down the line and you start to look at energy analysis, you may have to consider other options to make it easier for yourself. So you can include them, as I've mentioned, by just putting in the levels in your model, so having ceiling level for ground floor, ceiling level for first floor, and just tie your room or space to these levels. The other option would be just don't take account of them within Revit and just create them within the virtual environment once you get across, or just exclude them and account for them within the construction within the virtual environment. At the end of the day, it does come down to time versus requirement of them and what stage that you're trying to export your model to the virtual environment at. As I've mentioned a couple of times already, if it's early stage design, you're probably not going to be including them that early. You're probably just getting your results out for the basic spaces as they are, and you can develop the design to include them, or the Revit model to include them as you go along. Now, constructions is often a key question. Can we bring these across? At the moment, the actual constructions within Revit, they've actually started putting in the data that we would need. With previous versions, the information is not there and it isn't set up, so it doesn't have the thickness, the conductivity, density, specific heat capacity. These key kind of attributes that we would look for in a thermal model have not been in the construction. Just having a U-value numbers, a bit not enough information for us to use. So because it is there, we are looking to see what we can do to see if we can bring that across in the GBXML as well. And I can show a bit more again with that. So what have we done? Because we've found there have been issues, we've tried to do a lot of work on our algorithms. And I mentioned about the report because before we just basically exported the geometry and you would get the end result and you wouldn't really see what was going on in the background. So we've changed the report to basically show you what happens before we've touched the model and what the geometry looks like, and then what we've actually applied. We've actually applied our algorithms to try and tidy up the geometry that's coming across. So some of the settings that you can change in the user preferences before you actually export the model is you can tell the software, the virtual environment, to tidy any geometry, or you can tell it just to bring it in and let's see what it looks like before anything's been tidied up. We've also got an option to exclude columns, basically allowing the user not to have to go in and uncheck all room bounding columns to non-room bounding. We have had a few issues with that from basically when the column, the other piece of software, it could be Revit or whatever it is, there is an actual coding for that to be listed as a column. So if the software that you're bringing the GBXML in from is called a column, we will exclude it if you wish with that option. We found that some of the softwares don't have them, so our other functions try and tidy them up. If you found at that point that they weren't doing it, you would have to go back to the old method and exclude these, making them non-room bounding within your actual Revit model or whatever software you're using. There's the other two options there are the minimum space boundary area to be considered, so you can basically put a tolerance on what size of geometry has to be tidied up. So if you have maybe a space that is multifaceted and lots of curves on it and lots of surfaces, you can limit the amount that it tidies that to. And you can also, the last option there, maximum number of surfaces, this allows you to say, right, I want you to tidy all the zones that have got up to 500 surfaces in them. Anything above that, we'll just bring it in as it is. So, and you can play about with that value. So as I mentioned, we've improved our tidy algorithms to try and work harder for the end user, and it will try and close any rooms or spaces that don't have any, say, ceilings or floors on them. Our tidy algorithms will try and shut these off and make them a fully enclosed volume. And as I mentioned, you can turn this tidy function on and off. So at the end, you can see the two images there. That's how much our software is trying to work in the background. As I said, this is the report that you get as you're exporting your model from Revit to the virtual environment. So, or if, as I say, if you're just bringing in a GBXML just direct into the virtual environment, maybe a client of yours is giving you the XML and you don't actually have the Revit model or ArchiCAD model, whatever, then this is the report you'll get on import. And you can see here you'll basically get a before any work has been carried out on the GBXML, and then after we've processed it and brought it in. So there is a final checklist here that we've got that you can go through and check that you've done everything. As I say, the main one is check that you've placed rooms or spaces in every area of your model, so you've got a fully enclosed shell. Check that you've only got primary room bounding elements set, and define all your lower and upper boundaries using the levels. Any project information, like if you're using MEP, check that you've got that set up if you want to use that. You can, of course, just bring across the geometry and set all that information and data up and apply it to your model once it's in the virtual environment using the example, the tab edit that I showed you there, and check that you've got room volume computation set. I mentioned if you can detach your model from central and keep it as lean as possible. These are the key things. So there's a couple of points there that I covered that I want to just show you within the actual Revit. So if you want to set the complexity option, you go to your settings and info option. In here you just say, into the settings option. You've got your units options between imperial metric. If you go to the GBXML tab, you've got the settings there. Simple with shading right through to complex with millions and shading surfaces. So that's where you would set that. If you're wanting to bring in data from, say you are using MEP and you want to bring in occupancy information and template information, make sure you uncheck this override MEP transfer. Basically what will happen, if you tick this, you'll get the same dialogue as you would if you're using architecture, which I can show you in the next. So the other point I wanted to show you was, in this model you can see I've actually already done it, but if you're wanting to split up a space, and because you don't want to actually lose the results for this area in here, you can see I've not made the protruding wall non-room bounding, but I've just selected the, used a room separation line, gone off the end of the wall and placed 2 spaces in here. So the basic end result that you get is that you can get free airflow between these 2 spaces, and you'll get results for both individually at the same time. Now, before I forget, the other thing you need to check as well, I do this just to be sure, but if you go into the GBXML import from Revit, I just check that the export default values is unticked as well if you're using MEP and you want to apply properties from the dialog on the left hand side here. It's another thing to look at. So if I just cancel that off. Now what I'll do, if I just say OK to that, we'll just export another model. As I say, this is a fairly large model. It's not too big, but it'll take a few seconds to pop this up. So if you're using the override, you're basically bringing out just the geometry at this point, so you're not including any information here. So this is the dialog that will appear instead, and you can see the. So you can start setting up some room information about your model at this point now, rather than doing it with the MEP spaces. So you can say, you can set just whether you want actual building type, and start setting up some construction information and some building system information as well at this point. Now this is as you can see, is for a building as a whole, or you can go to the room tabs and say, let's go to, if I just select this, so you can actually isolate just the ground floor and maybe just apply some information to that floor and different information to the upper floors. So you can apply information room by room or floor by floor at this point. So this is just another way that you can follow the same process. Now you click on, this is our old report, which as you can see that isn't as informative, but it's still there as a check. And once you've checked that, you just reaffirm that you've done it and click OK. And we go through the same process. Now we'll get up our actual BIM report. So this is a report that's much clearer. And we can have a look at the information. So we can see how our spaces have performed on the export. So you can see there's a lot of yellow, which is not good, but over on the right hand side, after we've processed these, and it tells you basically corrections that have made to each of the spaces within the model. And again, you can launch into the virtual environment. I've just been using the Virtual Environment Pro just because that's what I'm used to using. And the differences between the 3 years basically as you go up through from the BE, where you get a much more detailed model. So just to show some of the things that have changed, if I just isolate the ground floor, you can see here the free airflow between these zones. If I just go into the viewer, there's a couple of other spaces I've done the same. So we can go in there and we can see we've got the free airflow between these two zones in here. Other things that I want to point out are, if you want to change any of these import settings, if you go to Tools, Preferences, and go into Shell Import, this is where you can change these settings in here. The other key one that I use is I untick the remove the override protection from imported inner volumes. Basically, it will bring the geometry in instead of using the XML inner volumes created by, say, Revit. What this does, if you untick this, it's a VE generated inner volume representation, which is a lot cleaner and tidier. And these will change once you start applying your constructions to your model. But this basically brings in a much cleaner model using, so that's the inner volumes and the shell import in the user preferences. These are the key options that you can use to play about with your import if you're having any issues.